And the president laid out a new framework for the U.S. fight against terrorism in an address at the National Defense University Thursday afternoon. This morning, as we speak, in Annapolis, Maryland, he's expected to return to the topic of military sexual assault during his address to the graduating class of the U.S. Naval Academy. And they are the next generation of leaders in the U.S. Armed Forces. Each year, the president delivers the commencement address at one of the military academies. And in his speech yesterday, he said he was willing to consider more oversight of deadly drone strikes and renewed his call to close the detention center at Guantanamo Bay.
President Obama said the threat of terror will never be eliminated, but that 12 years after 9/11, the fight can and must be conducted on a smaller scale.
From our use of drones to the detention of terrorist suspects, the decisions that we are making now will define the type of nation and world that we leave to our children.
Obama has deployed drones more aggressively than President Bush. For that, he offered no apologies.
Dozens of highly skilled al-Qaeda commanders, trainers, bomb makers, and operatives have been taken off the battlefield. Plots have been disrupted that would have targeted international aviation, U.S. transit systems, European cities, and our troops in Afghanistan. Simply put, these strikes have saved lives.
But they've also killed hundreds of civilians. And this week, Obama ordered sharp new limits on drone killings, with the Pentagon, not the CIA, calling the shots.
And before any strike is taken, there must be near certainty that no civilians will be killed or injured.
The Justice Department has acknowledged that 4 American citizens have been killed in drone strikes. The president said only one of them was specifically targeted. New Mexico-born Anwar al-Awlaki, a top al-Qaeda leader in Yemen.
But when a U.S. citizen goes abroad to wage war against America, his citizenship should no more serve as a shield than a sniper shooting down on an innocent crowd should be protected from a SWAT team. And as president, I would have been derelict in my duty had I not authorized the strike that took him out.
Obama urged Congress to close the military prison in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. To that end, he will seek permission to send 86 of the 166 jailed terror suspects already cleared for release to other countries.
Imagine a future 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, when the United States of America is still holding people who have been charged with no crime on a piece of land that is not part of our country.
For some analysis on the president's plans, our guests are Arise News Foreign Affairs contributor Brian Palmer, and with us via Skype is Tarek Ismail from the Columbia University Law School Human Rights Institute. He is a counterterrorism and human rights fellow. Tarek and Brian, so great to have both of you. Thank you so much for being with me. I want to start with just a general question. Your general impressions of the speech seemed to me we had to wait a long time to sort of get to the beef, if you will. Brian, let's start with you.
Well, I would say that there were some specifics, but generally, I believe the president outlined his philosophy on targeted killing. We're going to hear a lot more about that from the attorney from Center for Constitutional Rights. He spoke about some of the processes by which congressional committees are notified about these about the targeted killings. Generally, though, I got the sense that he was giving us what might be both considered a justification of current policy, because he defended targeted killing, he defended drone strikes, but he also gave us a little bit more clearer language using the term near certainty, that there would be no civilian casualties and continuing and imminent threat, things like that.
Tarek, what about you? What was the rhetoric to specific ratio for you?
Well, the president in his speech outlined a move away from a war footing. He signaled that the country is weary of war and that we cannot be in a state of perpetual war, but instead need to draw down our presence globally as far as our war engagement is concerned. But unfortunately, he has signaled those sorts of messages before, and we haven't seen the message meet up with the conduct, and I think that's what lots of people are looking for today and in the days and weeks and months to come.
Yeah, I think that's always the issue, to see how much the talk is walked. Let's listen to a little bit of what he said about the new guidelines, the restrictions for how drones would be used. We'll listen to it and talk about it on the back end.
Sure.
America does not take strikes when we have the ability to capture individual terrorists. Our preference is always to detain, interrogate, and prosecute them. America cannot take strikes wherever we choose. Our actions are bound by consultations with partners and respect for state sovereignty. America does not take strikes to punish individuals, and before any strike is taken, there must be near certainty that no civilians will be killed or injured.
This certainly is a reaction, Tarek, don't you think, to the criticism over at least the other 3 Americans that were killed from drone strikes, other than Anwar al-Awlaki, right?
Well, I think it's that, and it's more. I mean, on the first point that you make with respect to the 3 Americans who were not specifically targeted, as the Attorney General put it in his letter the day before the president's speech, we don't even know how the government and how the Obama administration classifies those people. Were they killed by accident? Were they killed as legal collateral damage? We're not sure how the government is considering them. And more broadly, I mean, those are the American citizens that have been killed. If 3 out of the 4 were not specifically targeted, what does that say about the non-citizens who have been killed in this campaign? And so beyond that, I mean, with respect to the first point that the president makes about a need to capture, and other points that have been brought up this morning, we just don't know. We don't know how much meat is on the bones to the legal standards that the president is articulating. So when the president says that we have to capture someone before, or we have to expend every resource to capture them before we kill them, we just don't know what that means. We don't have access to the standards that the president is talking about, and that's something that he needs to follow through with if he wants to stay true to his message.
Brian, I see you vigorously nodding your head here.
I think that's an excellent point, because the president announced that he had signed a presidential policy guidance that would dictate the rules under which lethal action would be used. We don't know what that is. We don't know whether it's going to be released to the public or not. Our democracy is built on, among other things, transparency and accountability. So if Obama, as Tarek is saying, is telling us all these great things about what he's going to do, he's essentially telling us these things in a vacuum, because we don't have the benchmarks to know, okay, this is what the Department of Justice says are going to be the legal criteria for a targeted killing. We don't know these things.
And how would you say, in a general sense, and even as it relates to the drone strike policy, because that's important to foreign policy, how did this speech, Brian, play internationally?
Well, there are a lot of countries out there.
I know.
I would say that a lot of individuals, whether here or there, are still kind of parsing the speech and trying to find the meat in it. I mean, if you look at studies done in Pakistan last year, 74% of Pakistanis feel that the U.S. is the enemy, and I think that based on that, and that's partly based on this policy. But I'd actually like to talk a little bit about this woman who is called a heckler, because she raises some of these points. Her name is Medea Benjamin. She's with Code Pink. I spoke with her about 15 years ago to talk about corporate social responsibility, but I called her this morning and I asked her, why did you choose this point to interrupt the president's speech? And she said, well, because he hadn't really said anything up to that point. She said, this is the commander-in-chief. He spoke about force feeding. He has the power to end that. He has the power to declare national security waivers, which Hillary Clinton, our Secretary of State, former Secretary of State, has spoken about, and send these detainees, transfer them out of this particular place. Now, in terms of the calling of her a heckler, that kind of got to me, because I thought, this is actually a protester in the tradition of nonviolent civil disobedience. She's speaking truth to power. And I found it problematic that the press was dismissing her. This was a closed event. This was not open to the public. So she was, in effect, speaking, at least for some members of the public, and I actually found that a courageous act.
And, you know, it was very impressive. You know, President Obama kept asking, let me finish, let me finish. But obviously she wasn't removed from the room. You know, he allowed her to make her comments and then even expressed sympathy for her point of view later on in the speech. That was so interesting. Before we run out of time, though, Tarek, let me turn back to you. You know, there was some of the speech spent sort of casting blame or reassigning blame. For instance, making the point that Congress knew about every drone strike before they happened, sort of going back saying, you've criticized me for this, but you knew about it too. Remember that for the critics. How did that play with you?
Well, first, it's important to note that it's not all of Congress that knew about these drone strikes, but certain members of Congress that knew. And beyond that, I mean, we have to think about this in the context of a democratic accountability. So the reason why there was a push initially to close Guantanamo, I think, in part is because of the pictures that came out from Guantanamo. That's the same with respect to Abu Ghraib and other situations where our country is at war and the public is able to see what's going on. And in this case, when the public is blinded from what's going on and it's happening behind the veil, the public is not going to rise up and make demands in the way that Medea Benjamin did yesterday because they just don't know what's happening. And so the fact that a few members of Congress know about it is not a defense, in my view, to the question of accountability and broader oversight.
All right, we'll have to stop it right there. Tarek Ismail, thank you so much for joining us. And Brian Palmer, thank you as always. We're going to hold you around. We're going to talk a little bit more about Guantanamo Bay, and we'll keep you for your comments on that. Appreciate it.